Marcus Ellison was 39 years old the afternoon his wife looked him in the eyes across their own kitchen table and said, "My lawyer will take everything." She said it calmly. She cited the way a person says something they have been rehearsing for a long time. Her hands were folded on the tablecloth he had laundered that morning. Her chin was steady. She was wearing the pearl earrings her mother had given her, and she had dressed for this moment the way other people dress for depositions. Marcus drove a 2016 Ford F-150 with 140,000 miles on it. His work boots were resold twice. At cookouts, Renata's friends called him Steady Eddie. Not his name, but the kind of nickname that told you everything about how a man was perceived by people who never thought to look deeper. It was a structural engineer by trade, quiet by temperament, and for 11 years he had been the load-bearing wall of a marriage that his wife had quietly been hollowing out from the inside. She did not know about the second LLC. She did not know about the 17-year relationship with a wealth management firm in Charlotte. She did not know what his grandmother had left him or what he had built on top of it. She did not know that the man sitting across from her, in his laundered shirt and his patient silence, had been watching the structural damage accumulate for 9 months and had already engineered exactly how to bring it down. "Your lawyer will take everything," she said again, because she thought repetition was power. $310,000. That was what she and her co-conspirator thought was sitting in their reach. She had no idea it was a fraction of a fraction. What Renata did not think to ask, what she never once considered in 11 years of marriage, was why a structural engineer who fixed other people's foundations never, not once, let her see the blueprints for his own. What happened next would cost her everything she thought she'd already won. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning that changed things had started the way most Saturdays started in that house on Alderman Drive in Charlotte. Early light through the side windows, thin and gold. The smell of coffee already made. Marcus sat at the table with his mug held in both hands, and the quiet in the house was the kind of quiet that had its own texture. Not peaceful, not empty. Just a silence that had learned to hold its shape. He had built the kitchen cabinets himself, white oak, dado joints, the kind of craftsmanship that people noticed without knowing why. The way they ran a hand along the face frame or opened the door and felt the weight of it move with intention. His grandmother, Opaline, had watched him work on them during a visit 7 years back, sitting in a fold-out chair in the middle of the kitchen with a glass of sweet tea, not saying much, just watching. When he set the last cabinet and stepped back, she had looked at them for a long time and said, "Marcus, a thing built right doesn't need to be told what it is." She had not meant only the cabinets, and he had understood that even then, she had been gone 4 years now. But the cabinets were still there, tight as the day he hung them, and he thought about her most mornings in that kitchen without thinking that he was thinking about her. The house was modest from the outside, a 1,400,000 square foot craftsman bungalow on a quiet street in a neighborhood that did not draw attention. Small yards, older trees, cars that people drove until they stopped running. It had bought it before the marriage for $187,000 and put 2 years of Saturdays into it before Renata had ever seen the inside. The bones were good. The bones were always what mattered. He rewired, replumbed, insulated, refinished. He poured the back patio himself on a hot July morning with a rented mixer and a neighbor who owed him a favor. By the time Renata moved in, the house was already something different than what it looked like from the road. She had always appreciated it the way people appreciate things they received rather than earned. Renata came downstairs at 9 and her robe scrolled her phone at the counter and kissed him on the cheek without looking away from the screen. He noticed she was wearing a light perfume, something citrus and unfamiliar. Not any of the bottles he'd seen in their bathroom. He did not comment on it. He sipped his coffee. He saw their phone, the one registered to his LLC, stayed in the interior pocket of his jacket on the hook by the door, where it always was, where she had never once thought to look. They had met at a continuing education conference in Raleigh 11 years ago. She was a hospital administrator, sharp and self-possessed, wearing a green blazer he still remembered clearly against the beige of the conference room. She had asked him a question about load distribution during a panel discussion, an intelligent question, the kind that proved she had been listening, and he had answered it fully. And she had nodded with real interest. And then she had asked a follow-up. Not many people asked follow-up questions. He had noticed. After the session ended, she was the one who crossed the room to continue the conversation. And there was nothing performed about it. Nothing calculated. She had been curious about his work in a way that felt genuine. He had been genuinely curious about hers. They talked for 2 hours in the hotel lobby, then found a restaurant nearby and talked for 2 more. They had driven back to Charlotte that night, thinking about a person for the first time in a long time, and the feeling was clean and uncomplicated and good. They dated for 2 years. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in his kitchen. No fanfare, no audience, just the two of them and a ring his grandmother had helped him choose on a Saturday in May. Andamile had cooked, and the windows open to the warm evening. She had cried with real tears. He had believed those tears entirely, and without reservation, the way a man believes a thing when there is nothing yet to suggest he should do otherwise. The envelope arrived that Saturday while she was still upstairs. He almost didn't see it. It had been slipped not through the mail slot, but under the gap at the base of the front door, which meant someone had walked it to the porch deliberately, by hand. His name only, no address, no return. Inside was a single photograph printed on plain paper. A restaurant he recognized, a place called The Linden on South Boulevard, where Renata had eaten with a colleague 3 Thursdays ago. A booth near the back. Renata and a man named Deshaun Proctor, whom Marcus had met twice at her hospital's charity events, and both times found too familiar in the way he addressed her, sitting across from each other with papers spread between them. The photograph was time-stamped 7:14 p.m. on a Thursday when Marcus had been in Greensboro completing a site inspection, which Renata had known about since Monday. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he set it on the table with the same care he set a tool down when he was finished with it. He looked out the window at the oak tree he had planted the first year in that house. Then he picked the photograph back up and put it in the pocket of his jacket next to his other phone and went back to his coffee. Some things you didn't say. Some things you carried until you understood their full weight. He was not a man given to panic, which was fortunate because what he found in the following 8 days required a steady hand and a very long view. He did not search her phone. He did not follow her. He did not hire anyone. What he did was go back to the things he had already seen and had not assigned meaning to, because the meaning was now apparent and the evidence had been right there the whole time. It started with the joint account. He had stopped depositing into it 18 months ago. His income went to accounts she did not know about, so it held only what she put in. It pulled 12 months of statements. What he found was a pattern so clean it could only have been deliberate. $2,400 out every 3 weeks. Always a Thursday. Always to an LLC called Prenton Advisory Services. He searched the name. It did not take long. The registered agent for Prenton Advisory Services was Deshaun L. Proctor. His hands did not shake. He moved to her email. She had given him the password 2 years ago to book a flight and never changed it, which was an oversight of the kind that only appears in retrospect. Ed did not read personal messages. He searched 2 terms, Prenton and the name of their divorce attorney, which she had mentioned once, casually, as a friend of a colleague. What came back was 14 months of correspondence. She had retained the attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, 11 months ago. She had been filing preliminary paperwork for 7. The strategy, as she and Fitch discussed it over email, was to wait until Marcus had completed a large commercial contract he had mentioned to her. Then file it the moment the funds transferred into accounts she could access. She anticipated those funds to be in the range of $280,000 to $340,000. $380,000 was her best estimate. He sat with that number and almost smiled. He cross-referenced the Prenton transfers against the joint account calendar. 22 payments over 14 months. That was $52,800 routed to Deshaun Proctor's business, pulled from the household account she had access to. He documented every one, photographed the statements with his phone, forwarded the emails to his private account, and exported the records to a folder on his personal laptop he named, simply Alderman. The section of the North Carolina General Statutes that covered dissipation of marital assets during the period preceding a divorce filing was something he had read once, years ago, for a client matter that touched real estate law. He read it again. Then he called the one person he called when the thing in front of him required both legal precision and absolute discretion. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. That was not performance. It was architecture. You didn't build a load-bearing structure in a hurry. You measured first, always, and you measured twice. Preparation is the work. The work is the point. Patricia Dunmore had been practicing family law in Charlotte for 26 years, and she had the particular composure of someone who had seen every species of marital catastrophe and could assess each one in the time it took to pour a cup of coffee. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and when Marcus arrived on a Tuesday morning with a manila envelope and a portable hard drive, she looked at both and said nothing. Simply gestured to the chair across from her desk. He laid it out for her methodically. The timeline, the print and payments, the email thread, the photograph, the attorney, the 11-month preparation window, the contract she had been waiting on. She reviewed the documents without expression. She made notes on a yellow legal pad, unhurried. When she was finished, she looked up and said, she retained Fitch. Fitch is good, but Fitch doesn't know what he doesn't know. And right now, there is quite a bit he doesn't know. She paused. How much does she believe the marital estate is worth? Marcus told her. Patricia nodded slowly. And the actual number? He told her that too. She set down her pen. The dissipation alone, documented, patterned, channeled to her co-conspirators, LLC. That changes her calculation entirely. That's not a divorce strategy. That is financial misconduct during dependency, and in this state, the court will assign it. She will not receive credit for what she moved. She may owe it back. She looked at him over her glasses. Gerald Fitch is going to have a very interesting conversation with his client when he sees what we file. He asked her what he needed to do. She told him. He wrote it down. He left. The following Thursday, he drove 40 minutes south to the town of Waxhaw to see his uncle Raymond, who was 71 years old and lived in a house full of hand tools and National Geographic magazines and the particular stillness of a man who had survived everything. Raymond had known Marcus since he was 7. He had taught him to use a level. He had attended his wedding. Raymond listened to all of it sitting in a green recliner, his hands folded the same way Marcus's hands folded, which was not coincidental. When Marcus was finished, Raymond was quiet for a long time, and then he said, the one thing a hollow thing can't survive is weight. He meant it about structures. He meant it about people. He meant both equally. Then Raymond said, I had a feeling about her when she changed the voicemail on your home phone without asking. I didn't say anything. I should have. He paused. She's not the first woman to mistake a quiet man for an empty one. Then Raymond told him something Marcus had not known. Renata had come to him alone, 8 months ago, asking about Marcus's grandmother's estate, whether there was property, whether it had been probated, whether Raymond knew the value. Raymond had told her nothing because he had nothing to tell. What Opaline had left Marcus wasn't land. It was a policy and a note, private, and none of it had ever passed through channels Renata could have traced. Marcus thanked him. He sat with Raymond for a while longer, not talking, just the two of them in the quiet of that house full of hand tools and old magazines. Two men of the same blood and the same temperament, and something passed between them that did not require words to be understood. It drove back to Charlotte in the dark. The next piece came from Patricia Sparaliga, a young man named Terence, who had worked forensic accounting before law school and had a specific gift for following money through the channels where it tried to disappear. What Terence found was that Prenton Advisory Services had been incorporated with a principal address that matched an investment property Deshaun Proctor owned outright. A duplex in Concord, purchased in 2019. The property had a federal tax lien filed against it in 2022. Proctor had been operating under a deferred prosecution agreement with the state attorney's office related to a prior wire fraud allegation involving a different business partner. The DPA was still active. Any new finding of financial misconduct would void it. Patricia reviewed the finding and called it what it was: leverage. Meanwhile, Marcus went home on Wednesday evening and ate dinner with his wife. She had made pasta. He told her the Greensboro project was close to completion. She asked when the payment was expected. He said he wasn't sure. Maybe another 3 or 4 weeks. She smiled and said no rush. He watched her hands as she passed the bread. He said nothing. Real Power operated in quiet rooms. and the room he was building was almost finished. The meeting was set for a Thursday morning, 10 o'clock, at Patricia's office on the 14th floor. The invitations had been specific and non-negotiable. Renata had been told, through Gerald Fitch, that Marcus wished to discuss a settlement before formal filing, that he was prepared to be reasonable, and that the meeting was to be kept private and professional. Fitch had accepted. Renata had accepted. She arrived in the suit she wore to board presentations, with her planner in hand and the look of a woman who expected to be handing out terms. What she had not expected was Marcos's Aunt Doretta, Opalin's surviving sister, seated in a chair along the wall, or Patricia Dunmore, who she clearly recognized and clearly had not anticipated, or Terence, with two binders on the table and a laptop open beside them, or the two additional individuals seated near the window, both of them attorneys Marcus had retained for specific matters related to his LLC structure and the Proctor DPA situation. She had not expected any of it. Fitch recognized Patricia immediately, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, but a kind of recalibration, the look of a man reassessing the room he has just walked into. It whispered something to Renata. She straightened her spine and held her expression. Marcus was already seated. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, untouched. He looked at his wife the way a structural engineer looks at a compromised beam. Not with anger, not with sentiment. Just with the complete clarity of someone who understands precisely where the failure lives. Patricia spoke first. She did not raise her voice. She laid the timeline on the table, printed, tabbed, and highlighted. The 14 months of email correspondence with Fitch, the 22 transfers to Prenton Advisory Services totaling $52,800, the dates cross-referenced against Marcus's documented travel schedule, the LLE's registration, the federal tax lien, the DPA, and what a new financial misconduct finding would mean for Deshaun Proctor. Renata's expression did not break immediately. It migrated from composed to watchful to something smaller. Then Terence opened the second binder. The actual marital estate, as prepared and documented by Marcus's financial advisor in collaboration with Patricia's office, took 4 pages to lay out. Not $318,000. Not the number Renata and Deshaun had been calibrating their plan around for 14 months. A number that required a second page to explain, because it included the LLC structure, the long-term wealth management accounts held in Marcus's name since before the marriage, the appreciation on the Alderman Drive property, 3 years of retained earnings from a commercial engineering contract that had been structured specifically within his business entity, and the residual value of Opalin's policy, which had been properly documented in a trust 8 years before the wedding and was therefore separate property, untouchable, insulated from any claim, but which told a story about the kind of man who had always quietly been building things for the long term. Renata looked at the number. She looked at Marcus. She looked back at the number in the way a person looks at a document they cannot quite make parse, the way the brain refuses, briefly, to accept what the eyes have read. Fitch leaned over and looked at the same page. He said nothing. His portfolio remained closed. She tried. She had prepared for this. She cited it had all been a misunderstanding, that the Prenton payments were loans she intended to repay, that she had been scared and acting out of fear, not calculation. She reached for his hand across the table. She was crying before she finished the second sentence. Doretta, who had said nothing until that moment, spoke from her chair along the wall. Her voice was even and unhurried, the same register Opaline had used, the same blood. "Baby," she said, "Opaline watched you perform for 11 years. She knew. She told Marcus on her last visit. He chose to hope differently." She paused. "He's done hoping." Renata looked at Marcus. He looked back at her without expression, without anger, without contempt, just with the quiet of a man who had already closed the file. He gathered his copy of the documents. He placed them in his briefcase. He stood. "You spent 14 months building a structure to take from me," he said. "I've been an engineer for 16 years. I know what a foundation that was never sound looks like." He buttoned his jacket. "I filed at 7 this morning. Fitch has the paperwork." He picked up his briefcase. "I'm not angry, Renata. I'm clear. Those are different things." He walked out of the room. He did not look back. The door closed behind him, and the room he left behind was as silent as a structure after the last bolt has been pulled. He was done. 14 months passed like the slow shift of a season. Unremarkable from the inside, but complete when you finally turned around to look at the distance you had covered. The house on Alderman Drive sold in the spring for $294,000. Marcos had already purchased a place in Cornelius, a town on the lake north of Charlotte, with a workshop in the back and a wide rear porch, looking out over the water. He spent 3 weekends pulling the deck boards and replacing them one by one. The same unhurried way he did all physical work, plank by plank, level checked, no shortcuts. A Japanese maple it planted that first month had put out new leaves by May, red at the tips, steady and deliberate. His firm completed the Greensboro project, and 2 more that followed it. He brought on a junior engineer named Davion, who reminded him of himself at 28, quiet, precise, thorough. It taught him what Opaline had taught him, that a thing built right didn't need to announce itself. He had met Celeste through Raymond's church, which was not something he had engineered and which he was grateful for. She was a landscape architect who asked good questions and did not perform for him. She was not loud about her feelings. She was simply present, honest, and entirely herself. The kind of woman who had already become who she was and didn't need company to confirm it. On the morning he planted the Japanese maple, she had sat on the porch steps and read a book and handed him a cold water bottle when he stood up to rest, and he had thought, yes, this is the shape of a real thing. As for Renata, he heard about it the way you hear about weather in a city you used to live in, from a distance, without urgency. Gerald Fitch withdrew from her representation 3 days after the meeting, citing a conflict of interest that he did not specify, but which Patricia's office understood perfectly. The attorney who replaced Fitch was a solo practitioner operating out of a strip mall in Kannapolis, and the outcome of the divorce proceedings reflected that disparity precisely. The dissipation finding held. The $52,800 in Prenton transfers was assigned against her share of the marital estate. The separate property trust for the Opaline policy was ruled non-marital and untouched. Deshaun Proctor's deferred prosecution agreement was voided by the state attorney's office in November. He relocated to Atlanta by January. His duplex in Concord sold under foreclosure. Renata had by all accounts not spoken to him since the summer. She was working in hospital administration in Morrisville, a smaller facility a step down in every measurable way. Her mother had not attended her birthday dinner. Her 2 closest friends, both of whom had been at the wedding on Alderman Drive, had chosen their silence carefully. He knew all of this because one of Raymond's church acquaintances mentioned it once, in passing, and Raymond had passed it along with the same neutrality with which he passed along weather reports. Marcos had nodded. He had not asked for more. On a Saturday in October, Marcos stood on his new back porch with his coffee and watched the lake catch the early light. The maple was holding its color, deep red, almost burgundy now, the way Japanese maples went in the fall before they let go. Celeste was inside, still sleeping, her car in the driveway, her book on the kitchen table where she'd left it the night before. The water was flat. Aeron stood at the far edge of the dock, absolutely still, the way herons stand when they are patient and certain and have nowhere else to be. He thought of Opaline. He thought of Raymond. He thought of the cabinets in the house on Alderman Drive that he had not taken, that were still there, white oak, dado joints, tight as the day he built them. A thing built right, outlasting the people who had tried to take it apart. He had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.